They Cloned Tyrone, a film about community control and psychology of normalized harm. So let's get right into it. Now, They Cloned Tyrone is one of those films that kind of hides in plain sight. On the surface, it kind of looks like a pulpy hood sci-fi comedy. It's kind of funny, it's loud, it's slightly ridiculous. But underneath the surface is something far more unsettling, and because this is a film about systemic control, about behavioral engineering and cultural extraction. And this is a quiet horror about how manipulation stops feeling like violence once it turns profitable. Now, this is kind of mirroring some other things in media. First of all, we've got some historical documentation about all those control mechanisms done in experimentation. I'm going to talk about all that at the end of this. But this film really kind of reminds me of like the cousin of Get Out. But this is the one who listens to funk and smokes in the corner and doesn't explain itself. And all that's intentional. So first, I want to talk about some of the performances that we see, like the three major ones. First, John Boyega, who flips this street dude architect into something far more deeply human and very, very tragic. Because what he's playing is not just a character. This is a character who, or a man who already knows his limits, even though he doesn't know who placed him there. Then you have Jamie Foxx, who brings this comedy edge to it that only he can. Laughs first, guns put later. But his humor isn't decoration, it's really armor. And then we have Teyonah Parris, who is like the real MVP of the story, right? She is curious, she is defiant, she is intelligent. She doesn't lecture, but she's a threat to the systems because they hate questions more than they hate violence. So the first thing we have to do is kind of frame the environment that they're in, because this is really significant. Now, psychologically, this hood or neighborhood functions like this contained nervous systems. All the inputs are controlled: food, drugs, media, routine, and thus the outputs are very predictable: addiction, conflict, stagnation. So this kind of shows this reinforcement of this loop over and over again, and we see it very clearly with Tyrone, or Fontaine, the character he's known in this setting. That'll be important as well, because we see him in this repetitive loop. He wakes up, he goes and talks to his mom, he goes to the liquor store, he pours out a little brew for the guy in the corner. So he is very much just entrenched in this life that he doesn't really know about. He understands his role, he's the drug dealer, but on some level he starts to realize he's being positioned there as the film progresses. And as he realizes that he's a clone, it gets even deeper. And this is where we see some conditioning that is very disturbing, particularly in his relationship with his mother, or rather his non-relationship. Like psychologically, his mother exists in a voice without presence. And this really matters because we're talking about early childhood development, this presence kind of equaling safety, and this touch being part of regulation. So he's visibly going through life without any of that. And this voice behind a door gives something very different. It's instruction without any comfort. It's authority without any intimacy, and it's control without any care. So the door isn't just a door, it's attachment denial that's actually made physical. He learns one lesson as a child: I hear guidance, but I won't be held to any standards. And that kind of shapes everything that would come out of him. He's emotionally muted, he's hyper control, risk averse, he's not a big dreamer. He doesn't ask, he doesn't reach, he doesn't expect anything, because all he wants to do is survive. Now, the insidious part is that his mother is missing by design. From a system psychology perspective, a strong maternal bond creates resilience. Resilience creates unpredictability, and unpredictability creates a threat in this closed system. So when he finally learns the truth, the trauma isn't just that you were cloned. That almost becomes a subset. It's really worse, is that you were never cloned. You were cloned never having love. You were never supposed to have that. You were supposed to thrive without it. And this is a deep psychological, as well as a wound, as well as any physical wound they could have inflicted on him. Because you never see this face, so she never gets humanized. And within that, he starts to realize what his role in the community is. And that is as of a destructor. He's there to destroy his own community, which he does very cheaply. So when we zoom out, we start to see that all these things about him, particularly his mother, that's a template. You replace a mother, replace real parenting with these systems, right? Jamie Foxx's character of Slick Charles fits perfectly in this environment. He's not just comic relief. He is the representation of adaptive dissociation. Humor softens his trauma. Jokes prevent collapse, and laughter becomes a survival technology. But all this delays the confrontation. So we see him as a release valve, but the humor becomes more like avoidance as we see it get deeper. And then there's Yo-Yo, who is Tiana Paris's character. She's dangerous not because she's uniquely special, but because she reflects. Psychologically, she represents this cognitive idea. She's thinking about thinking. And curiosity becomes resistance. Pattern recognition becomes very dangerous and breaking condition. So every system hates one thing, and that's someone who notices the repetition. She doesn't accept that that's just how it is. And this alone makes her a significant threat. And then we look at the environment, and the spot that stands out to me is the Get Yo Drink On liquor store, which becomes a ritual space. It's kind of the jump off point for Fontaine every single day. People just don't go there just to get drink. They go to return to their baseline. This is their self-medication, right? But what about that self-medication becomes part of the illness? That's what we're seeing here. Drugs in the film aren't glorious or tragic. They're just there. They flatten mood, they compress time, they erode agency. So it's compliance through chemistry, an old technique. And even intimacy gets managed. Like the sex work isn't framed morally, it's framed economically and psychologically. Intimacy becomes transactional, desire gets monetized, and connection becomes brief, like very controlled. So long-term bonding doesn't feel safe. Vulnerability becomes risky. So intimacy is allowed, but never very deeply. And at the end of this, we're going to see that they don't get to, a real resolution. There's still conflict there. So this isn't a pure fictional story. America has a documented history of behavioral modification experiments. MK Ultra explored identity destabilization and compliance. Tuskegee weaponized deception and information control. Military psychological ops study obedience, moral collapse, and environmental shaping. So that with corporate behavior research opens up engineering of all kind of bad loops, dopamine cycles, and addiction pathways. Urban planning decision shapes stress, aggression, and long-term cognition. It's not a single villain, but with incentives and neglect and probability, we can see how all these things work together. So what they get right in this film is they know that behavior is easier to shape than belief systems. Environments shape behavior more than ideologies, and control works best when it just feels normal. You don't really need clones for what they're doing, but this is why it works for this film. This is why the film lingers. They're not asking what could happen, they're showing you what already has happened. So this film gives a very unique take on looking at the hood. And this is something that we've seen reflected in other films, like Black Dynamite, who does exactly the same type of thing, where they're looking at this situation where they're feeding alcohol into the system. And the alcohol's got something. It's alcohol and chicken that they have rooted in Black Dynamite through the beer and or I'm thinking of another film where they had the chicken. But we've seen this stereotype exist in a couple of different films. This just kind of brings it to the clarity of right now and puts it on a larger scale. And then in the cloning part isn't as significant as the control part. So a great film. If you're willing to look at all the different levels of it, I think you'll find some really interesting information. I certainly did, and I want to share that. And I may do a deeper dive into some of the characters so we can kind of show some of the insights that they all reveal.